It is a cold September morning above the Danube, and the hills shimmer with steel as French and Hungarian knights tighten girths and lower their visors. Below them, a thin brown line of Ottoman irregulars waits in ragged ranks, masking rows of hidden stakes and the silent files of Janissaries standing farther back. Messengers and veterans whisper warnings, but the knights only laugh, spurring their armored horses forward, convinced this will be an easy, glorious ride through cowards. History will remember it instead as the day chivalry rode to its own funeral, and the crusading age began to die. 200 years before Nicopolis, the West rode east with the certainty of prophets, and the first crusaders carved their way into Jerusalem with blood, hymn, and steel. For a moment, it seemed as if faith on horseback could redraw the map of the world, planting Latin kingdoms in the dust of old empires. But decades turned to generations, and holy war hardened into habit. Crusades launched for dynastic advantage, for plunder, for the settling of debts dressed up as vows to God. What began as a storm of zeal slowly decayed into a parade of failed expeditions and hollow pageantry. By the late 14th century, the word crusade still echoed in churches and courts, but it rang thinner than before, more about banners, prestige, and knightly image than the hard, ugly work of frontier defense. The real line between Christendom and Islam no longer ran through Jerusalem's walls but along the rivers and passes of the Balkans, where Bulgarian and Serbian lands staggered under Ottoman pressure. There, on the Danube, raids and counter-raids replaced romantic visions of reclaiming the Holy Sepulchre. While Europe dreamed of the past, a different power was quietly remaking the present. The Ottomans were not a band of wandering fanatics, but a disciplined, state-driven war machine, vassal princes, bound by oath, cavalry and infantry drilled to move like parts of a single hand, and a sultan who hammered the frontier city by city. Each campaign tightened their grip on the Balkans, each victory pushing the line of Islam farther into Europe's neglected backyard. Nicopolis would be framed as a chance to reverse this tide, to prove the armored knights still ruled the battlefield and the crusading idea still had teeth. In truth, it was the last echo of an age already dying, galloping toward an empire that was very much alive. On Hungary's bleeding frontier, King Sigismund watched villages burn and border fortresses fall, his kingdom gnawed at year after year by Ottoman raids. He knew his own strength was not enough, so he sent his pleas westward, asking Christendom for soldiers who understood that this was a grinding, ugly war of survival. What he received, instead, were processions of banners, trumpets, and glittering armor. From France and Burgundy came not grim professionals, but young lions of the tournament fields, eager for stories, titles, and ransom gold. They arrived on the Danube like a traveling court, silk tents blooming across the camps, gold spurs flashing in the sun, horses draped in embroidered cloth. To them, this crusade was another great stage, a place to prove personal valor before God, ladies, and history. They spoke of honor more than supply lines, of glory more than scouting, measuring their worth in charges and challenges, not in quiet, disciplined marches. Their world smelled of perfume and polished leather, even as smoke from burned frontier villages drifted in on the wind. The Pope's blessing and crusading bulls wrapped the expedition in the language of holy war, crosses sewn onto cloaks and shields. Yet under the hymns and speeches, unpaid debts and private rivalries clung to the army like mud, and every noble house guarded its prestige as jealously as its baggage train. Some men rode for faith, but many more rode for reputation, plunder, and a chance to outshine their peers. Hungarian and Balkan veterans tried to explain the foe they faced: horse archers who vanished into dust, feigned retreats, ambushes laid in broken ground. The French lords heard caution and translated it as cowardice. dismissing men who had survived years on the frontier as timid provincials unworthy of leading the charge. They would march under the cross, but bow first to their own pride. In that choice, the call to glory began to sound less like a trumpet to salvation and more like a drumbeat leading them toward disaster. They called him Yildirim the Thunderbolt, not because he raged, but because he struck before his enemies finished speaking his name. Bayezid I was no storybook sultan reclining on cushions. He was a hard-eyed commander who slept in the saddle as often as in a palace. Christian chroniclers feared him. Muslim rivals grudgingly respected him. And border lords on every side learned that when his banners appeared on the horizon, they had hours, not days, to decide between obedience and ruin. Where the Crusader nobles staged their glory, Bayezid arranged problems and solutions. His empire was less a straight line on a map than a web pulled tight across Anatolia and deep into the Balkan cities taken. Princes turned into vassals, roads and passes watched by men who owed him their thrones. Ottoman power flowed through this web Sipahi cavalry, summoned by riders. Garrisons rotated, taxes and grain, feeding a war machine that moved with purpose rather than pageantry. Bayezid understood Crusader armies well enough to respect them. He knew that in a single pitched clash, they could be terrifying. But he also knew they were brittle, fractured by pride, poorly supplied, slow to adapt and quick to charge where honor pointed, even if wisdom did not. So while the Crusaders burned villages and drank to their easy victories along the Danube, Bayezid was counting miles and days. He called in his Sipahis, marshaled Janissaries drilled to fight as one, and summoned vassal contingents, Serbs among them, who would ride at his command whether their hearts burned for him or not. His army moved like a storm front, silent until it broke. The Crusaders imagined a glorious siege at Nicopolis, ladders and banners against walls. But Bayezid intended something else entirely to choose the ground, the moment and the shape of the fight, so that when thunder finally rolled over the Danube, it would speak with his voice alone. The crusade rolled down the Danube like a tidal wave wrapped in silk and steel. Muslim-held river towns that had haunted Hungarian reports for years suddenly crumpled in days, gates smashed, small garrisons cut down, minarets and rooftops swallowed by fire. French and Burgundian knights rode at the head of each assault, laughing behind their visors as they chased fleeing defenders through narrow streets. Every smoking ruin left in their wake whispered the same lie into their ears: "You are unstoppable." Each minor victory fed the next, and restraint became a stranger in the Crusader camp. Loot piled up, prisoners were paraded, and drunken boasts about taking Bayezid's head home to Europe circled the campfires. When Nicopolis finally rose above the river walls on high ground, towers watching the Danube, the army greeted it less as a threat than as a grand finale. Ladders were hauled forward, and French and allied knights turned the siege into a tournament, racing to be first under the walls. Jeering at any talk of patience or trenches, Sigismund and the Balkan veterans watched this with a tightening knot in their stomachs. They urged reconnaissance, warned that the main Ottoman army was still in the field, and begged the knights to conserve strength for the real battle that had not yet come. The Crusaders listened, nodded, and went back to their contests, reading every day without a counterattack as proof that Bayezid was afraid. In truth, the delay they mocked was nothing more than distance, and the Thunderbolt was already racing toward Nicopolis, a storm front the Crusaders could not see, but would soon feel. The warning did not come as a rumor, but as dust on the horizon and scouts stumbling into camp with foam-flecked horses. Bayezid's main army was close days away at most, perhaps hours if he forced the march. Trumpets called the great men to council, and the noise of the camp dimmed as knights, princes, and commanders crowded into Sigismund's tent. Outside, the siege of Nicopolis flickered on. Inside, the future of the crusade balanced on the edge of a table. Sigismund spoke first, voice steady over the creak of leather and armor. He laid out a simple plan: infantry and missile troops in a solid line to absorb the first shock. Heavy cavalry held back in reserve, and Hungarian and Wallachian light troops screening the front and flanks, probing for feints and ambushes. They will try to lure us, to break our formation on bad ground, he warned. So we choose the field. We hold our knights until the moment is right, on parchment and in reason. It was a plan that could work. The French and Burgundian lords heard him and bristled. To ride behind infantry, to let peasants and Vlachs take the first clash, sounded to them like an insult carved into their coats of arms. One after another, they rose, voices hot, cheeks flushed, insisting that the honor of Christendom demanded that French chivalry lead the charge. Shall we? One scoffed. Hide behind shepherds on your own soil. Your Majesty. The discussion curdled into accusation and wounded pride. Sigismund tried again. Speaking of Ottoman horse archers, feigned retreats, hidden ditches and stakes. But every mention of caution twisted in French ears into the word cowardice. No one wanted to be the man who went home and admitted he had let others take the glory. In the end, prestige and reputation shouted louder than prudence, and the council agreed that the heavy cavalry would attack first, unsupported. In that stifling tent, beneath silken banners and painted saints, strategy bowed to ego, and the crusade was lost before a single lance lowered on the field. Dawn comes thin and pale over the Danube, washing the hills in a colorless light that makes steel shine like ice. In the chill air, men's breath ghosts around their helmets as squires tighten straps and buckle the last plates of armor into place. Horses stamp and snort, tossing their heads under caparisons stitched with lions and lilies. As banners unfurl to catch the first weak wind, across the slope, the rest of the army gathers to watch. Rank upon rank of infantry and archers, staring as if the lists of a great tournament have been laid out before them. Beyond, on the rolling ground ahead, the Ottoman line seems almost an afterthought, a thin, ragged fringe of irregulars and light troops scattered across the field. They look tired, outnumbered, barely worthy of the polished wall of lances forming opposite them. Trumpets cry, drums rattle, and the French and Allied knights begin to move. First at a walk, the creak of leather and the clink of harness loud in the morning, quiet. Then comes the trot, a rumbling chorus of hooves beating the earth into submission as lances tilt and spurs bite. At the signal, the line breaks into a full gallop, and the world narrows to the thunder under their saddles and the shrinking distance to the enemy. The first impact is like a hammer hitting glass. The Ottoman front shatters. Men torn from their feet and sent flying. Horses and riders punching holes straight through the flimsy screen. Irregulars turn and run, some cut down from behind, others simply dropping their weapons and fleeing into the dust. Behind their visors, the knights grin and shout, convinced they have already broken the spine of the enemy army. They chase the rout downhill and across the uneven ground. Drunk on the rush of speed and slaughter, individual banners surge ahead, each noble straining to be first through the fleeing mob, hacking at backs and shoulders as if competing for a prize. Behind them, the infantry, missile troops, and allied cavalry struggle to keep up, the ordered lines dissolving into a ragged tail that stretches farther with every heartbeat. Dust rises in choking clouds, swallowing the rear ranks and cutting the knights off from the rest of their own army. Still they press on, armor streaked with sweat and blood, horses lathered and heaving as they drive up the next long rise in the ground. The fleeing irregulars thin out and vanish over the crest, and for a moment it feels like the last barrier between them and total victory is about to fall. Lances are leveled again, hooves pounding as they surge to the top, ready to see a broken enemy scattering below. Instead, the hilltop reveals a dark band of churned earth and jagged wood, and beyond it a silent forest of spears and leveled weapons, waiting without a word for the shining dead who have just charged into their sight. The line of earth and wood is not just an obstacle, it is a row of teeth. Sharpened stakes jut out at an angle, hidden until the last heartbeat, waiting exactly at the height of a charging horse's chest. The first ranks hit them at full speed, and the sound is worse than any battle cry. A wet, cracking thud of bone and wood and metal colliding. Horses rear and scream, bodies flung forward. Armored riders tumbling into a tangle of splintered stakes. Flailing hooves and sudden mud. Momentum dies in an instant. Knights try to force their mounts through, only to feel them shudder and collapse underneath, pinning their legs under a thrashing, dying weight. Others dismount into a chaos of jagged wood and fallen men, their heavy plate turning each step into a desperate stagger. And it is at that moment, when the shining charge has become a writhing heap, that the air fills with the hiss of arrows. Ottoman archers and azaps, safely behind the stakes, loose volley after volley into the packed targets, each shaft punching into joints, visors, and the unarmored gaps between plates. Then the Janissaries step forward, not as a mob but as a machine rows of disciplined infantry. Shields up, blades ready, advancing in measured rhythm, they thrust into the confusion, cutting down knights who can barely lift their swords in the cramped killing ground. A few crusaders, burning with stubborn courage, manage to break through here and there, staggering into the Janissary ranks and carving brief, bloody circles around themselves before numbers and discipline close in and silence them. From a rise in the rear, Bayezid watches until the moment is right, his face unreadable as the flower of French chivalry thrashes against his prepared teeth. Then he gives the signal, and the Sipahi cavalry rides not at the stakes, but around them, curving like a scythe toward the exposed flanks and rear of the Crusader vanguard. Exhausted knights, trapped among stakes and corpses, suddenly find fresh horsemen crashing into them from the sides, while behind them dust clouds mark where their own support should have been. On distant hills, Hungarian and Wallachian contingents stare in horror as banners they had followed across half a continent vanish into the press and then fall, one by one, into the dirt. With the vanguard crushed and their banners trampled into the mud, the rest of the Crusader line buckles under the sudden weight of the Ottoman advance. Infantry units try to form ranks on churned, bloody ground, only to be hit before their lines can lock shields. Arrows and cavalry tearing holes where officers shout for order. Late arriving contingents find not a battle to join, but a disaster to die in. Fed piecemeal into a storm that has already decided its direction, word reaches Sigismund that the front is gone. And in that moment, he understands Nicopolis is lost. He orders a retreat toward the Danube, and what had been an army becomes a panic. Men in mail and plate run for the riverbanks, hurling themselves onto already overpacked boats that ride low and perilous in the water. Others wade in anyway, trying to swim with iron on their shoulders, vanishing beneath the current within sight of the far shore. Amid the shouting and splintering hulls, a handful of ships push off with Sigismund and other great lords aboard, gliding away from a shore that is still screaming. When the noise fades, the field above Nicopolis is a harvest of bodies and kneeling men. Bayezid walks among the prisoners, his officers sorting them like spoil common soldiers bound together. Nobles pulled aside to have their names and ransoms weighed. For some high-born captives, there will be years of chains and negotiations instead of a grave. For many others, there will be a sword stroke or a lifetime of slavery. In less than a day, the last great crusading army has ceased to exist, not in a blaze before Jerusalem's walls, but in the mud of the lower Danube, where the old illusion of holy war on horseback finally drowns. When the shouting stops, Nicopolis does not fall silent. It hums with flies and the low croak of crows circling over the hills. Smoke drifts from smoldering wagons and shattered siege engines, curling around broken lances and twisted mail left where men fell. The battlefield has become a graveyard without headstones. armor and bodies scattered together in the same indifferent grass. Into this landscape walks Bayezid, not as a raging conqueror, but as a judge entering his court. He remembers the reports from the Danube villages burned, fields trampled, Muslim civilians cut down or enslaved by men who called themselves soldiers of the cross. That memory weighs on his steps as prisoners are brought forward in knots and lines. Eyes raw with fear and exhaustion. For the common soldiers and low-ranking men, the verdict is swift and terrible mass executions. Rows of prisoners forced to kneel as blades rise and fall, turning captured flesh into a warning written on the earth. But when noble names are spoken, the tone shifts. There are questions, haggling, calculations of ransom and utility. Because some enemies can be more useful, humiliated, and indebted than dead. The cruelty here is not random, it is policy. Terror is being used to seal the Danube frontier in blood, to tell every lord in Europe what price will be paid if they bring crusading fire into Ottoman lands again. At the same time, mercy becomes a coin Bayezid spends carefully, buying influence, gold, and hostages to future behavior. By the time the crows settle fully and the last bargains are struck, it is clear that the Thunderbolt has done more than win a battle. He has sent a message that will echo across borders and generations, carved into memory as deeply as any wound. The news does not arrive as a single thunderclap, but as a slow, sickening roll of names. In the halls of France and Burgundy, heralds unroll parchments that seem to stretch forever, reading out lists of the dead, the missing, the imprisoned fathers and sons, brothers and heirs, erased in a single campaign. Ransom demands follow, cold and precise, placing price tags on men once thought priceless. It feels less like the loss of an army and more like the pruning of entire family trees. Around council tables and cathedral choirs, another realization settles like dust after a collapse. If the best of Europe's knights, riding together under the cross, could be shattered in a day on the Danube, then the old promise that chivalry plus faith equals victory has been broken. Kings who once spoke eagerly of crusade now weigh the risk of losing half their noble houses in a single throw of the dice. The word itself begins to tarnish, less a banner of glory than a reminder of debts, funerals, and empty halls. Nicopolis does not join the songs of heroic last stands. It becomes a cautionary tale, spoken with winces and lowered voices. It shows that armored charges and personal valor mean little against prepared ground, disciplined infantry, and organized states that fight as one. In the shock of that discovery, Europe stares into a mirror and sees an old dream dying, one where shining lances could still decide the fate of the world. What rises in its place is something colder and harder, and the age of easy crusading illusions is over. Nicopolis was not the last time armored knights rode to their doom, but it was one of the first great warnings. In the decades and centuries that followed, other fields, Varna, the gun-smoked plains where cannons roared and pike squares held, would hammer the same lesson into Europe's memory. Again and again. Charges that would once have broken empires shattered instead against walls of steel. Fire and discipline. The age of the lone heroic rider was fading, replaced by something larger, colder, and more organized. On the Danube in 1396, you can already see the outlines of that new world. The Crusaders fight as a patchwork of feudal hosts, each noble house guarding its honor and its banner, measuring success in personal glory rather than in plans completed. Across from them, the Ottomans move as a state-centralized authority. Professional soldiers, engineered defenses, and an army that fights like a single organism instead of 100 competing egos. Stakes and Janissaries at Nicopolis are cousins to the cannons and drilled musketeers that will soon dominate Europe's wars. In that sense, Nicopolis is less a lone catastrophe than the first toll of a larger bell. It marks the moment when faith without foresight and courage without discipline were shown. Brutally, to be no longer enough. From here, the road bends toward gunpowder, standing armies, and rulers who wage war with ledgers and maps as much as with swords. The last crusade did not just end on the banks of the Danube. It taught that unthinking valor on horseback leads not to glory, but to graves.